So we've already started talking a little bit, and I wasn't going to start recording this straight away, but I think it's very poignant to talk about with the current situation that's going on in the States. As you're much closer to it than me. You're still far away, but you're closer to it than me. But you were just saying just now about how it's just effectively lies in the media and quite frankly, a bunch of white dudes.
Yeah, it's shocking to watch, from Canada to see this is really happening. And, when I watch it, and this is, from my academic background in sort of critical theory, what I really see is this thing that the Frankfurt School were talking about years ago, this manipulation of the media and development truth through kind of repetitive changes to narratives. And if you just continually reinforce them, they become reality. And, when I looked at those images yesterday of what was happening in Washington, like it was all white dudes.
Yeah.
Trump has built a specific sort of world down there right now that is terrifying.
That's it. It is terrifying. And he's been saying, I've just been catching up on the news about it, and he's been saying that the 6th of January was the day that it was going to be like the day of reckoning. And
right.
God, I mean, some of the videos that have come out across social media as well. There's a video that's kind of doing the rounds of a woman who's claiming that she got maced, and she's holding a towel and like rubbing her eyes. And if you actually look in the video closely, in the towel, she's got a peeled onion.
Right.
And she's rubbing an onion on her eyes, saying like, the police are, shit and all this sort of stuff. And she's like, we're here because we're starting a revolution and all this kind of thing. And I'm just sitting there thinking, you're starting a revolution with an onion in your hands.
Right.
You're just trying to make it look worse. And
yeah.
I didn't notice it at first, but a friend of mine pointed it out to me, and I was just like, shit, it's just, this is, I didn't think we'd see it. I honestly didn't think we'd see it like this. That's what surprised me, I think.
Well, and I mean, the sort of convenience of relativism being what it is, like without giving it too much thought, you think about if that's the reaction to, the police being involved or the military being involved in protecting the situation last night, it's pretty quick to dismiss what happened at the church when Trump marched down the street with his military behind him, for a photo op.
Shocking.
So, yeah. So optimism being what it is, I hope that it's just a blip on the radar, and it's the rise of a small faction, and and it's dealt with quickly, and it just disappears. I think that the change in regime is for the better, in terms of its effect on global peace, and I think it's allowing a lot of global anxiety to subside a little bit in the wake of a lot of other things to worry about. I think the transition into a new government in the States is probably going to be a positive thing globally.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do agree with you. Yeah. It's literally, I've not really spoken about it to anyone today, so it's good to kind of get a bit of your opinion on it as well. So I'm actually I'll go back onto where we normally would be thinking with podcasts. You and I have done a lot of chatting together in the past. Probably a couple of months, hasn't it been?
Yeah. We've spent a lot of time talking about bikes.
Yeah, and the reason for this is I've not really publicly said it, but I internally with you, we do a podcast for Cervélo, and you, Phil, are probably, I mean this in the best possible way, one of the granddaddies of the brand. Like, you just the oracle, maybe?
I think I'm just the last. I've been there a while.
And you just, the knowledge bombs that I've had from you over the last couple of months has been pretty crazy. And I was pretty adamant that we would then do a podcast that was through my podcast. And it's effectively just us having a chat, which is, to be honest, is what we've been doing quite a lot of anyway. So there is this magical internal Cervélo podcast we've been doing, which has been the reason why I have not actually done a podcast for several weeks, because I had a lot of editing to do. a lot of editing to do, as in 45 episodes worth of editing to do. And anyway, I was very keen to make it that the first podcast of 2021 was with you, because...
Well, thank you. I'm honored.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've talked about a hell of a lot of stuff, and, you know, everything from Cervélo's history to present day and future stuff. There's so many interesting things going on with the brand at the moment. And one of the big ones that's obviously, I think most people will now be aware of 2021 is Jumbo Visma. And it's really exciting. And the bikes look great. I wasn't sure. I thought the colorway at first, but actually when you see it with the kit and everything, I think it works really well.
It's a much more subdued and sort of elegant take on what we did with Sunweb. Make no mistake. Sunweb were fantastic to work with. The transition to Jumbo is really exciting because it does sort of symbolize something for us from moving into a, potential Grand Tour winning squad. The controversy about the paint jobs is quite funny, and we were talking about it yesterday. And after whatever 10 years with Cervélo, I've learned that the reality about paint jobs is that for those people who like them, they like them.
Yeah.
And for all the people who hate it, as many people love it, some people are ambivalent. But it's all context, as you say. It's about tying together with the kit. A black and yellow bike on its own is like whatever. But when you see it sort of in context and when it's in motion and it's it's under someone wearing the yellow and black of Jumbo, it looks really effective. It's really beautiful. And I think it's, we go through these waves, I think, in Pro Tour, where we go through the sort of NASCAR look and then we move back into, the elegant stuff, and then back out to NASCAR eventually and back into elegant. And, I think the only takeaway, in terms of graphics from my perspective is, God, I hope we don't go back to the point where we're doing black on black graphics for Pro Tour riders, because it seems to me a hell of a lot of money to drop into something that you don't get any advertising.
Yeah. It's what I thought was I quite like seeing it when all the teams release their kit for the new season, and the Jumbo one is more black heavy than previous iterations, and same with the Lazer helmet is much more black and less yellow, which I think looks really, really smart actually. But then I was looking at some of the other kits that there's still a few that haven't been announced, but I really like the AG2 kit. I really, really like it. Yeah,
me too.
It's super smart, big bold graphics. I'm down with the brown shorts. I'm fine with it. It's just nice and bold, really, really strong. Seeing them move bike brands and everything, it's going to be a really exciting year for them. But then on the contrast of it, it was I think Wanty Groupert's kit was announced yesterday or today maybe, and it's just it's very old school cycling. It's just covered in sponsors and being a billboard, isn't it? Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see what EF kit looks like when that comes out. They haven't announced it. There's still a few more I think they've got to be announced. I do think the DSM kit, previously Sunweb, looks like an old Team Sky kit though.
Yeah, I think anytime you incorporate those kind of colors together now, it's gonna kind of resonate with something that's been done previously. But I actually quite like it. I think it's quite elegant.
Yeah, it's smart. It's still very smart.
I think it's a classy. Yeah, I think it's a classy kit.
Yeah. I think slowly teams are kind of getting around the idea that it needs to. If you want to sell pro team kit, unless you're maybe Belgian, French, or Italian, really, you're not going to buy pro team kit. It's just there's that weird stigmatism with buying pro team kit, which is stupid. I always think that if you like a kit, just buy it. It doesn't matter who wears it or whatever. And I think some of the teams are starting to get around this idea that you have to make it a bit more visually appealing to Joe Blogs out on the road to actually be interested in buying it. And when it was Team Sky, a lot in the UK, you still in fact see loads of people riding around in Team Sky jerseys because it's now become a bit of a classic. But it was popular because it was just black, white logo, really simple. In contrast, whenever another great example of a classic kit that's just become iconic is the Mapai stuff, because it's really fun, really iconic, really colourful. You go to Belgium and you still see loads of people wearing Mapai kit all the time, and
Right.
I mean, you still see people wearing Quickstep kit throughout the years, and what I think Quickstep have done so well is that they're not the title sponsor of the team anymore. Everyone still calls them Quickstep, and I'm like, man,
that's true.
It's pretty smart, pretty smart. And their kit's pretty good, to be fair. It's like it's a bit more subtle than last year. Like last year, I thought it looked like a blue thing was eating a white thing, and it just looks a bit weird. And this year it's all the same kind of tone blue, which is much nicer. Anyway, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about.
Sorry, that brings me. I got a question for you about kit.
Okay.
Because I know that you do some design work for Attacus.
Yeah.
And Cervélo was responsible for one of the most popular kits.
Yeah.
Produced, which was just the test team stuff, the black one with the big white E on it, and that was sold and sold and sold, and you still see it on the road.
Yeah.
Sometimes a little bit worse for wear, but continues. And it always struck me at the time that one of the advantages to that was that it was team kit without looking like team kit.
Mm-hmm.
At a time when we were beginning to transition as an industry away from everyone just believing they were racers into less of a race culture and more of an inclusion culture. That kind of resonated because there wasn't a lot available at the time that was understated like that, other than the stuff that looked like your mom bought it for you for your birthday or something. Yeah. So I was thinking about that. You had that great post on Instagram yesterday. It was the kind of, from you on your tricycle through to, where you are trenching, 2 weeks ago. And I really liked it because to me, in a lot of ways, I mean, I'm an old guy and I come from that generation where, like, if you bought a road bike, it was because you were going to get on the line. But when I look at something like that and the discussions we've had over the last couple of months, I think that in a lot of ways you kind of represent that newer culture coming into the sport, which is really about the riding and not about being a fanboy. Yeah. And sort of, I loved the kind of like the ownership of that sort of physiological change that you had, where you discovered the bike, you weren't a super healthy guy, you were doing okay, but then it's always in context of bike riding anyway, which is always a dangerous kind of measure to use for sure. But it was really cool to see that movement through because you had those great images of you in like a Sky jersey and on that red Roubaix and stuff like that. And it's such a typical flow. But now, in 2021 or there's this beautiful kind of arrival of all those brands like, whether it's Search and State or Mac or Atticus or whomever, who are not necessarily driven by making these kind of NASCAR Pro Tour graphics, but making really good stuff for people to wear, not necessarily advertise. And I'm interested in kind of where you stand on that as a designer.
For me, I mean, I'm going to pull something up that's on my desk. And it's underneath an assortment of camera lenses right now, so it's going to take a second. So for me, whenever I'm doing anything design-wise, I don't design on the computer. It's really important to me.
Old school.
I've always done this. I've done this since I did this from when I studied architecture. Whenever we talk to the past, I always have notebooks. I've got currently in front of me 3 notebooks, various different ones. One's my scribble book, one's my shit notebook, and one's my smart notebook. And my smart notebook I actually got for Christmas. It's very lovely. It's nice color. It's a moleskin. I love moleskins.
Yeah, nice stock too.
Yeah, they're just perfect, and they're just really good for like laying out goals and events and challenges and stuff like that. But I've always been someone that has to draw and write stuff. It's just always done it. Illustrations with any design, if it's kit, whatever it is, draw something or paint something or use something as an inspiration for it. So previous example would be when I was in Morocco last year, and one of my favorite artists is Yves Klein. He's really famous for a certain tone of blue, which is a color that he created. And there's a building that in Morocco that is painted that color. And also that contrasted, and it had these beautiful pink, like super, super vibrant pink flowers coming across it. That ended up being an inspiration for the first Zero Lemon jersey I did. And then another example of what I'm playing around at the moment is this, which you can see. So this is basically playing around with paints and different textures and trying to work out patterns and stuff in it. So that's where my head's at the moment for a few different things, which is kind of cool. So for me, aesthetically, with
at the risk of drawing parallels, it's very sort of Kandinsky, that piece you're working on now, with sort of form and flow, and maybe a little more
do you know
tonal,
another artist called Cy Twombly?
Yeah, I know the name. Yeah. I can't share any of his work right now, but
the Cy Twombly used a lot of Cy Twombly was someone I did a lot of studying about when I was, I don't even know how long ago it is now, a long time ago. I was properly painting a lot. And somewhere I've got like a painting that I did, which is super influenced by his style. Effectively, it's to do with like using really thick, heavy watercolors, and you allow them to run, etc., however you naturally would. But I did it a bit different, because Cy uses like big, heavy like palettes and stuff to paint with. I basically was getting like huge A1 sheets of paper and literally dosing them in white spirit, so the whole thing was like soaked, and then using that as the base for painting, and it allowed the water, like oil-based paints, to run in certain ways and dilute in certain ways. It became really, really interesting, and that was something I did a long time ago, and that's something I'm keen to start exploring, getting kit design. And for me, the reason why I do design work with Attacus is they're my friends fundamentally, and I think personally that they make really, really good kit. But another part of it is that they allow me to kind of do what I want. They're like, as long as you're kind of happy with it and the design, we'll support you in that venture. And for me, I think there's now become this more fashion style with cycling, and I think it was probably really prominent maybe, I don't know, 5 years ago, where there were lots of fashion brands that appeared, but a lot of those more fashion orientated cycling brands are now, the performance of the quality of the kit in its performance and how it's designed, how it's fitted is just enhancing more and more and more. So I've ridden in Attacus kit. I've had no issues riding in Attacus kit for 24 hours or multiple days, bikepacking, whatever it is. And that's because as they have grown as a company, they've spent time researching and getting better materials, better pads, making the kits as best as possible. Also, what I like is that they're really comfortable. And that quite often, when I've looked at other more mainstream brands and tried other more, some of the more old school brands, the quality of the fabrics and stuff may be fantastic, but the fit may be not that comfortable. For me, whenever I do any design work on kit, it's normally because there's something that's bugging me, and not necessarily bugging me in a bad way, but there'll be something that just a tick that keeps going on in my head, like this painting that I did. Well, it's not even a painting, it's just an experiment with paints like that. It was something that's bugging me for a long time, and I wanted to try and work out if that is an idea could become something, play around with it, test it in a few different formats, then effectively digitize it, because you need to digitize these kind of things to be able to print it. And then from that digitization, get samples made and eventually see what turns out. Sometimes the thing is with these kind of things, you never really know how it's going to look until you get the finished product.
Right. I don't know anything about sublimation really, but are there limitations to what you can digitize? Like do you have to design to manufacture to a certain degree, or is it kind of free? Is the technology good enough now that you can just do whatever you want?
There are limitations. Your limitations are normally, I did a design these patterns for a friend of mine, hyper complicated patterns. It was basically taken from photos that he took of the Lake District, and from those photos I then did a painting, and then from that I then transformed these into a digital version of the painting, and they became so complex because of the layers of colors in them. We just had to simplify it out, because it was just like, Jesus, there's like 500 different color layers to this, and it was too much. And that's where your limitation comes in, is more that you can overcomplicate things, and if you overcomplicate it, the printing process becomes slower, probably not as good, not as accurate. But you also have to bear in mind, if you're with the designing that I do, I will go and specify, I don't know if I've got the color chart anywhere. I will go and specify the specific Pantones of every single color. That can take a long time. If you've got, for example, if you've got 20 colors on something, that's 20 Pantones you need to then specify. And then it's like a massive sheet about, you know, a couple of meters across with tiny squares, like centimeter squares of every single color available. And you're like sitting there going, they don't look quite right together, putting them together, just going, oh, that doesn't look quite right. Maybe this one. So there's a lot of process on that. And it's definitely getting better. The technology is getting better. But you don't have the freedom to just do what you want. Like you could, for example, print a photograph and then wear that on a jersey, but it probably isn't going to come out exactly how you'd like it to come out.
Yeah, I think we've seen that in the past. I think there's I have this image of a jersey. It looks like a Monet print or something that somebody's stuck on the back. I can picture it across the back of the pockets or across the pocket. I can't remember which it was, but I remember thinking how horrible it was.
Yeah, it just doesn't look quite.
It doesn't translate. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's definitely getting better. And I mean, I push the Attacus guys quite a lot to try and do things that they maybe not so comfortable doing themselves in their brand, but things that I'm quite happy to take the risk at doing. So the second jersey, the marble jersey, the time to draw marble veins in a computer it took so long. But I always wanted to do a jersey like it. And the amount of man hours that went into it, as opposed to the amount that was sold, like I didn't make anything out of it really. But it was more of almost a bit of a vanity project for me because I really wanted to create it. And that's.
Did you have to scale the marble by size?
So what I did was I have, from my architecture days, I still have quite a few samples of marble because I love marble anyway. I just think it's beautiful, and the whole how it's created fascinates me. You know, you think about stones, it's effectively heat and pressure, and you create some of the most beautiful and, you know, inornate patterns that are out there. So I have quite a few samples of that. So it was a case of like taking these samples, trying to work out the ones that the veining was quite good on them, scan them, bring them into computer, start to draw them digitally, and then work out what kind of then go, oh, I want that vein of that sample, but I want that vein of that sample, and then that vein of that sample, and incorporate it all together, and then start to like build, like almost collage something into what could become a kit. It's confusing as fuck, but you end up getting, I mean, for me, that I did it with a cap first of all, as like a tester, and then I was kind of like, yeah, the cap looks really, really cool. Let's go on to doing a jersey. And then
it turned out nicely.
Yeah, and then what I do is they're always the jerseys. I do them as pre-orders. I don't, because I can't afford to buy 100 of them.
Right.
I couldn't afford to do that. So I've sort of set myself, and in chatting with Attacus about it, my rules were everything that's designed, we'll get like a sample made up. That's what we're doing going forward. And then it's done, made to order. So no extras will be ever ordered. There's going to be no spares. It's literally, if you've got one from that pre-order, you're going to have one. If you haven't, tough luck, you missed out, wait to the next one. And it means it keeps the demand and interest in it, which is really, really good.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Those kind of limited spec things it's pretty interesting. And in the way we can work today, you know, that's possible, right? You don't have to produce, you know, 1,500 of them. You know, the run doesn't have to be that big. And there really is room in today's market to have a limited edition and accept that it's a limited edition, you know? Yeah. You know, I think about, you know, from Cervélo perspective, I mean, when we did the first R5CA, I think we made 200 of them and sold 200 overnight. And then we made 200 and we sat on 150 of them for, you know, for another 2 years. Yeah. You know, there's something to be said for, you know, being able to short the market somewhat, but, you know, release 100% of what you've produced.
Yeah.
I mean, get caught up in that sense of like, oh, I need to make another, you know, there's demand for this, so I got to make another 200.
Yeah, I've had like a lot of people ask like, oh, are you going to open the order again for X jersey or whatever it is? And I've just, and like, I mean, realistically, there might have been like another 10 orders, but it's not worth it. It's not worth it. It's not worth the hassle. I'd rather like, you know, that one's done, move on to the next one. And that means it keeps it interesting for me as well.
Sure.
The big reason for doing it is, as well as like, you know, admittedly, because the order numbers are going to be lower, the cost to produce is higher. But so you balance that out by charging a little bit more to kind of incorporate that. But it also means that there's no stock wasted. There's no stock sitting on a shelf somewhere. There's nothing, you know, it's not gathering dust. It's not taking up space in my flat, which has got boxes all over the place, as you can see there, because of moving stuff. And it just means that, you know, the people that purchase are people that genuinely want it. Same with, like, as you say, with like limited edition runs of bikes. Like, I mean, the latest one's the R5 Lamborghini one, which looks bonkers.
Yeah.
It's cool.
It's cool.
Or what was the other one? Was there a Lamborghini?
There's a P5X.
Yeah, that was nuts.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what that stuff should be, right? It should be, you know, I mean, we're in a sport where people do like a little bit of differentiation between them and their buddy. You know, that's the success of Project One and, you know, some of the other custom paint projects. So it's nice to have those opportunities to have something a little bit unique. So you're out on the, because really, I mean, when push comes to shove, 90% of the people out there are riding a bike from one of 10 brands or 8 brands, right? So it is kind of nice to have those opportunities to differentiate yourself from the other guys in the club.
Yeah, I know I'm definitely one of those people that likes to be on something a bit different.
Yeah.
And the irony of that is, like, my Aspero, which is to my side here, that's why I keep looking over it. I love that bike, as you know. And I think that so I was speaking to who was I speaking to about it? Scotty. And he said it to me that the working title of the colorway was Cosmic Vomit. And if people don't know the bike I mean, it is Cervélo Aspero. It's the 2020 colorway in the like emerald, like really beautiful, like tealy green, and it's got like a load of little like light sort of blue speckles on it as well. Yeah. And you very rarely see him in that color. I don't know why, but lots of people
released as a 650B only. So if you're not seeing a lot of 650B bikes or frame set custom builds up, you don't see it as much. So there's regions, you know, where 650B is all the rage, and they gobbled those up. But if it's 700C stuff, then it didn't show up. Yeah,
like the ones I seem to see the most is of the 2020 range is definitely the gold and the red.
Yeah.
And then of the 2021 colors, you've got the black with the gold logos. It's almost like a really dark red where you can still see the carbon weave. And then you've got there's a gray, and there's a white to blue, I think it is, or like a light blue to a darker blue fade.
It's blues, yeah. It's light blue to, it's like a sky blue into darker blue, yeah.
And I don't like any of the colorways as much, I'll be honest. I quite like the gold, the red and the gold one I quite like. Yeah. The gray and the blue one, the blue one's nice. The gray one was probably my least favorite.
For people who like that kind of stuff, they'll like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And it's good that it's nice that there's, it's been really noticeable, I think, with Cervélo, especially over the last maybe 2 or 3 years. The brand's definitely moved away from just doing a red bike, just doing a black bike. The red and the black bike are still available, but there's also a green bike, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
You know, and it partially comes from a design aesthetic, but also from just the reality that Cervélo was a brand that we needed to be safe. We need to go to the car park and look around and see what color cars people buy. Like when it's a big investment, you know, generally speaking, there's some trends around what people spend the money on. You know, it's the running shoe world. You know, if you're running your 3 pairs of shoes a year, so you can buy neon yellow ones, you know, in October, knowing that they're, you know, once they're out of style, you're going to get a new pair anyway. but the reality was, like Cervélo tends to be a slower turn at retail than a lot of other brands. So we used to, when we were a really small, I mean, we're still a small company, but when we were really small, we were really concerned about playing it safe with our colors, and also making sure that that transition from model year to model year didn't render the one that was left over, obsolete. Like there was still, whereas a lot of brands would be a 2-month turn on the floor, at retail, we're much longer than that often. But as we've grown, as we're becoming more widely accepted and more of a global brand, and our model line is growing, it gives us the opportunity to have some crazier colors in there as well. So we do get that chance to pick up the unique market as well as just going silver, red, black, the end. But we still got to have them, right? You still got to have the red one and the black one. And I think red is very much a Cervélo color.
Yeah.
We've often had a red bike, and we did away with it for a couple of years, and heard from globally from both athletes and from retailers that they're like, where's the red bike? Like, if you can't have a Cervélo in red, who do you get a red bike from? So we try to keep those around, but being able to kind of turn those sort of crazier colors is a bit of fun. It brings a bit of life into it.
Yeah, like some of the colors for the S series, the S5, and the Caledonia this year.
Pretty intense, eh?
They're bloody cool. The S series, I think it is, and there's a similar color for the S5, but it's like that pearlescent-y, bluey, greeny purple. The one for the S5 looks a bit more matte, and the one for the S series looks proper gloss, and they're stunning. Really, really nice.
The paint technologies have come a long way. Like, I think about when we were doing the chrome bikes for Quebec tour. I mean, I think you've done a beautiful job of replicating one of the Quebec S5s.
It's stunning.
It's gorgeous, right? But it's funny, like, that's not that long ago, but that was another one of those projects that Cervélo got ourselves involved in, that was just so over the top in terms of costs and development and resources, because nobody's done a chrome bike effectively. So we actually ended up having, there had been some bikes that were chrome-ish, which is why that was possible. But when we started working with the paint supplier on doing those bikes, it was a really long process where they had to develop the paint to do that. And once they did it, of course, then it just like suddenly there was like all kinds of chrome, and they were all tied to that same factory that was doing the paint for us. But I'd say in the past 5 years, the days of multi-layer or flecked paint jobs being super heavy, it's changed. They're not where they were 6 years ago in terms of weight. They've come down and come down and come down. So it gives us a chance to do an S5 in a kind of crazy colorway and not think that it's going to add 300 or 400 grams of paint to the
It's quite I know when my S5 was being painted, the guys that did it, Gun Control, were saying the paint they were using, the amount of like time to process it,
that's right,
is pretty crazy, because you basically have to, when you undercoat the frame, you have to let it sit for an incredibly long time to allow the toxins to come out of the paint. And then when you apply the chrome paint, you then have to let it sit for a month to basically allow the colors to sink in as well as possible. Because Sammy, who painted it, was explaining to me that the chrome paint is very hard to work with anyway, but it also is very easy to fuck it up. So it can fade very easily, it can tarnish very easily. So you need to allow it as long as possible to effectively stick on the bike, and then don't do anything over the top. And he looked at a few different paint samples. The one he went with on mine in the end was one he used to paint like helmets for like Red Bull and stuff like that as well.
Right.
And the one that he settled with on the end, he was like, this is one that's used in motorsport, and it's a long process, but it will be really good. And it actually looks more chromey than a lot of chrome bikes I've seen before. Sounds really silly to say, but it has a hell of a lot of shine in it.
Right.
the photo is actually shot. The guys that did it, they professionally had it photo shoot. It's professionally photographed. That's the word I meant. And I haven't seen the photos yet. I'm hoping to see them probably in the next week or two.
Right.
But they were sending me like little snapshots while they were doing it, and the photographer guy was like struggling to photograph it because of the shine, because you can see him in it and all the camera stuff. So yeah, it's gonna be pretty cool. And I mean, the reason why I had it repainted in that colorway was because it used to belong to a pro, and I wanted it to match his MTN Quebecer National Champs bike.
And you got a nice note from him.
Yeah, that was really cool, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I got basically a video saying "nice bike" effectively from Edvard Bossenhagen, which his wife organised.
Oh, is that right? Is that how that worked?
Yeah, I didn't know. I asked the guys at Gun Control, how did you do that? And they were like, oh, we just asked his wife.
How do they know her?
Honestly, I don't know.
Okay.
Just, I think, people knowing people in cycling, one of those kind of weird connections that somehow, somewhere they've known each other through something. And I just thought it was really funny. But yeah, I haven't got it yet. So yeah, quite excited to. I've seen it, but I haven't got it. On the same elk of it, the guys at the frame that I raffled off, that's quite ironically gone to someone that I rode with when I did the 107 TDF.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and it will fit him. It's his size because he's quite a small guy. And it's like I spoke to him on the phone when I drew the raffle, and then I was doing it on Instagram Live, and I put all the names into a massive plastic bag, printed them all out, folded them up, took it out. It was this guy's name, and I was like, "Shit, I know this guy." This is quite funny. Like, as in, I don't know him well, but I was like, I know him as in I know the name. And straight away, he requested to share the screen on Instagram Live, and he was just like absolutely buzzing. It's Christmas Day morning, and so it's gonna be really nice to see that bike is going to get used and enjoyed properly. It's going to be, if you live around like Newcastle way in the UK, you will be seeing that bike basically.
So it's a guy that joined you on the ride as you kind of trundled through the north.
On the way back down.
That's cool.
Yeah, really, really cool. And he joined because he is a friend of one of my friends basically. Right. So it's quite nice that all tied up actually. But yeah, it's like, I think the cycling is quite a lot about almost peacocking in the best context of the word. People like individuality, and we're seeing that so much more by people who are getting their bikes custom painted.
That's right. Yeah,
there's the huge demand for it now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the old days, it was you buy a frame off the peg and then you put the parts you want on it, and then we, in the mid 90s, we transitioned into 100% drivetrains from, I think it was safe to assume, even in the late 80s, early 90s, the most desirable bike was like a full Campag group. But then you'd still have people putting the simplex shifters on it, or what, so you always made those kind of little decisions. But then it seems that once SIS came in from Shimano, people started to realize that, there was more people coming into the sport, and Shimano did a really good job of taking all the guesswork and all of the stupid stuff out of it, which was like having to overshift and feather and all that stuff that happened with friction shifters. And then it transitioned into full group sets, and that kind of culture of building your own bike kind of faded to a certain degree. I mean, you're still buying frames off the peg, but it was like full group set from Shimano, full group set from Campag, and then it sort of, from there, STI levers and, so on and so forth, and all the integration came in. So it's kind of nice, like, to see that move now back to people sort of making choices around what they can run. And maybe it's not as prolific as it once was. You see bikes now with custom paint and oversized pulley wheel cages and, different bars and stems, and, and thank God we have seats that fit us now. So people are choosing saddles that fit. And so you see that those kind of changes coming back into the market, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really, really nice, isn't it?
100, of the same bike in a group, because that's what the local shop sells.
And the point of your knowledge of Shimano is you used to work for Shimano as well.
Yeah, I was with Shimano for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. How many years were you at Shimano?
10 years.
And how many years have you been at Cervélo now?
Well, I'm in my 10th. And there's a block. I'm an old guy. So I was at Shimano for 10 years. And then in 2005, I left Shimano and went back to school for a few years, taught for a few years, and then joined Cervélo in late 2010.
That's crazy to think. I mean, 10th year must be quite satisfying. The amount of stuff you've seen in that 10 years.
It's been a really interesting time to be part of the organization, because there's been a lot of changes in technology. There's been a lot of changes in our company. We've grown. We're making better bikes without changing our design or engineering ethos. We've grown with that. As we learn more, we grow more. And so things have been getting better and better and better. And we're now in this big transition space where we're moving down to Irvine, California, which is not because we wanted to leave Toronto by any stretch of the imagination. It really came down to the fact that, for a long time, Cervélo was an engineering firm first and a bike company later. And we didn't have bike people. We had people who liked bikes. We had a lot of composite engineers, aerodynamicists, really skilled engineers in the company. But we didn't always drive for those people that have been in the industry forever. And, it really comes down to, the theory was, if you just hire people from other bike companies, you just get the same bike again. So, we sort of had designers and composite engineers, so that you had input from both of those spheres. And that's driven a lot of the technologies that's Cervélo have developed over the years. I always point at Schwalbe as being that point in the industry where it was a transition from trying to use carbon fiber the same way we used steel, into understanding that if you let the material in the load case dictate the shape, then you actually end up with superior bikes. And, those first Schwalbe bikes, the R3s, really changed things. The stiffness to weight ratios were massive. And that wasn't someone from the bike industry that designed that. That was a composite engineer that was tasked with figuring out how to use this material most effectively.
So for people that don't know what Schwalbe is, can you just briefly cover that?
Schwalbe. Yeah, Schwalbe is the tube shape those sort of squared off tube shapes that we developed with the R3 in 2000. They arrived in 2006. And that's the sort of slightly oval, slightly square tubes that really kind of allow, the structure of the tube to manage twisting loads and bending loads more efficiently than just a round tube or just a square tube, So it allowed us to have thinner walls and have a lot of structure in the tube shape, which is, in the industry, that's kind of how it's done now. But at the time, it was a lot of, 1 or 1.5 inch round carbon tubes getting bonded together, or, people were making some monocoque bikes, but they were still round tubes.
Yeah.
Right. So it was a fundamental change. It was a complete dismissal of tradition and expectations in terms of bike aesthetics, and really allow the technology to do the work it needs to do.
As you say, that's someone who's coming at it from a background which is not cycling, so they're not really influenced from the past and the history.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think Cervélo has a history of that. I mean, it was always about bucking the trends and allowing the data to make the decisions, as opposed to what had been done previously. And that's as early as 5, like when Phil and Gerard were in the wind tunnel. They were custom drawing NACA airfoil tube sets to get welded together in an off-site location when everyone else was still trying to do round steel tubes. And it wasn't accepted necessarily, but it was indicative of what the brand was about, so. Getting back to that though, I think we've started there, we've moved through, we continue on those paths internally and from an engineering perspective, and continue to make gains. And a lot of it is we sit inside and we're aware of what we don't know, and we've never been. I think one of the things that for me is important in Cervélo is that we've never been the brand that tries to fit something into a piece of the pie, like if just because that's happening doesn't mean that we need to put a thing there, which sometimes looks a lot like we're late to market, which is true. But it's also because, sometimes it's difficult for us to rationalize, because we're so small, just interrupting an S5 product cycle or a P5 product cycle or something like that. That takes a lot of work just to build a thing to shove into a part of the market that's, that's already saturated or whatever it is. We tend to sit back and try to understand whether or not we can bring any value to it.
The Aspero is a great example of that as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was, very much. I mean, we were late to market with gravel. Gravel was happening. We know that. We don't claim to own that space at all. But, if you really look back at the early days of gravel, it really was othering. Like it was a category of bikes that was often a steel hand-built bike. It was, big beards and that really wasn't what Cervélo was about, at a time when we were really about triathlon and triathletes and pro tour road. What was happening, the kind of counter-public thing that was happening with gravel didn't appear to us to be a place that we had a role. Like we could build something and stick it there, but would it be any good, and do people want it? So, as it matured, we started to see some patterns that made a little bit more sense for us, and you started to kind of understand what it was that we could bring to the table that was a bit more Cervélo and less, less just trying to build a bike with big tire clearance. So, and I think it resonated. It's been a really successful bike for us. As much as anything, it feels like, the promise we made was that we're going to build a bike that appeals to people who like riding road bikes quickly. And that's kind of what the market, right?
Yeah. It's just a fun bike to ride. Like that's how I try and explain. People, I get asked quite a lot what I think about it, and I'm just like, it's just loads of fun. Yeah. It's really fun off road. It's fun on road. You've got the ability to put big fat tires on it. You put road tires on it. Like you can change how it handles. It's fun. Bunny hops really well. Wheelies really well. It's a fun bike to ride. I mean, these are essential things, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, it should be fun, right? Yeah. It'll be fun.
Yeah, exactly. Cycling is just like I try and always think of it as the bikes are just big toys. Like for us, it's an opportunity to go and have fun. It's our release. It's our way out of a normal life. It's an opportunity to have fun and enjoy yourself and go out and have a smile on your face. And as a kid, that for me was riding a bike. As an adult, it's kind of the same thing. Whereas a kid, it was for me riding a bike and collecting toy trains. I love toy trains.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I used to line them up on the carpet at my mum's house, like a line, all perfectly lined up. And I used to get really pissed off if anyone moved one. Yeah.
You didn't get yourself a train, you got yourself a bike.
Yeah, I mean, kind of cooler, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, and I think that's why getting back to that Instagram post you put in yesterday, there was something, I love the authenticity of it. And when I've used it a bunch of times in presentations over the years, when we're talking about, because Cervélo is a really technical brand and we get really deep into the weeds on stuff that, it's just a way of sort of explaining the decisions we make more than it is believing that everyone needs to know, the nuance. But I've often stuck that picture in of a kid with his hands in the air riding his bike with because when it all boils down to, whether you're talking about trail or bottom bracket drop or, 900 grams or whatever the thing is that you're discussing, when push comes to shove, it's just all about putting a smile on your face.
Yeah.
If you like going fast on skinny things, then road bikes are fun.
My old S5, I still say that is like one of the funnest bikes, equally on a different type of reasoning to the Aspero, one of the funnest bikes I've ridden, because it's just like a rocket. It's so
a rocket.
fast. And it's like, I've done 3 24-hour races on it, like relay races. And I did, I think it is 3 24-hour relays on it. And every single one, it's just like, because it's a relay race. So you go out there, you smash yourself to pieces for like a couple of hours and you got time off the rest. And every single one I've done it on, I've always come off the bike and I'm still smiling. And everyone's like, why are you smiling? I'm like, because this bike's just fun to ride. I'm getting to ride it around a motor car circuit or whatever it is really, really fast. And it's fun. Like I've done it at the Le Mans circuit. I've done it at Brands Hatch twice on that bike, 80mm wheels on it. Great fun.
And it's funny how fun becomes a relative sort of position. Like, you know, we all sort of suffer from that affliction where fun is also, you know, pushing yourself to the point of, you know,
explosion.
I'm unglued and kind of taking a bit of joy out of the misery you put yourself through. Like if you don't have that sort of streak of masochism in you, then, you know, we're probably healthier, but that's part of that hands in the air fun thing. Like,
you know, maybe riding up and down Box Hill 91 times was fun. But there was points in it where it was quite fun. Like there's a couple of points where it's like just intentionally bunny hopping the speed bumps because just having a laugh at it. Like you've got to keep yourself entertained, haven't you? Because there's when you
you had that.
Go on.
Yeah, you had that point where you were so cold and so broken that you were kind of falling asleep on the bike, and you know, and I think that's one of those moments where if you don't come out of that laughing, like if you're not the kind of person that actually looks back at that and has a bit of a giggle,
it's brilliant.
Then you'll never get back on your bike, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like at the actual moment was not good, but I did the right decision, and I was like, I'm just going to stop. I'm going to stop for a bit, get some food, warm up, go again. I think I stopped for half an hour and just like had a little snooze and got warm, jumped on the bike, carried on. Instantly felt so much better for it. But in hindsight, looking back on it, I remember I think it's hilarious because I remember I know I wasn't making sense.
Right.
At that point, it's just like because I was tired. I was been up for over 24 hours. And I know I was talking gobbledygook, and everyone, like my partner who was with me and one of my mates who was with me as well, were just like, I very clearly remember them looking at me like, what did you just say? Like complete confusion. And at the time I was like, no, it's making complete sense. It didn't make any sense at all.
Right.
And my mate Francis, he was filming like bits of it. He filmed the bit of me talking about tomatoes being salty.
Yeah.
I mean, and what I actually meant is that tomatoes have an umami taste, which is a salty taste, but it doesn't mean they're salty. But and like umami is like, I don't know how to explain it as a taste, but it's like soy.
It's the fat. It's fattiness, isn't it?
Yeah, like soy sauce.
7th flavor profile.
Cheese as well, things like that.
Yeah.
And tomatoes do have a slight umami flavor. But what I was trying to say is that it's really good when you've been eating sweet stuff to have something that's savory. That's what I was trying to say. I basically turned around and said tomatoes are salty, aren't they?
Yeah.
Made sense in my head, and I think that's all that matters.
Would you ever think about doing like the race, the Ram? Is that
I
something?
really want to.
Yeah, you want to do that?
I'd love to do it. It's so expensive though.
Oh yeah.
I've done. So if you do the National 24-hour TT in the UK is one of the qualification races for it.
Oh, is that right?
And so and then the Revolve 24, which is a 24-hour race around Brands Hatch, is also one of the qualification races for it. And I know the organisers for Revolve very, very well. And I've done Revolve 3 times now, and I've done the National 24 3 times. So technically, I've actually qualified 6 times. Well, 5 times because I got pneumonia in one of the National 24 hours and didn't finish. Fair enough reason to not finish.
Yeah, exactly.
So technically, I've qualified for it 5 times. The guys from Revolve, we've talked quite a long time about trying to work out a way of being able to do it. And I mean, I think realistically, you probably need like between 5 and 10 grand to fund it.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah,
expensive. I'd love to
vans and people and food and
yeah. Like you think like you're going to need a support car, you're going to need a support team, food. Yeah. Accommodation, all of it adds up. Petrol, it's going to be between 5 and 10 grand. It's been properly on my list because I've never really cycled in America. I'd love to cycle across America, and that seems like a great way of doing it. But then why don't I just go and bikepack it?
Right.
Equally. But I'd love to do it to actually physically compare myself against some other people internationally. You don't get that opportunity very often. Maybe one day. I'm still young.
Right.
Most of the people that do it are in their 40s. So
that's true. Yeah, that's very true.
There's also like the Trans Am, which is the bikepacking version. That's been on my radar for a long time.
Right.
But same thing. I mean, it's not as expensive, but it's still expensive. These kind of big multi-day things, I don't think people realize how much they can end up costing. Even the 107 TDF ride, that was, several £1,000s in total. You bear in mind like food and places to stay and stuff. I was
going to say you had to sleep on the 107.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Same in Australia. When I rode across Australia, I think that including flights was probably like $5,000 or $6,000.
Right.
Yeah, and that was the most comparable thing to 107, as it was. It's 3 weeks of riding, effectively, point to point. And when you're in the middle of buttfuck nowhere in Australia, in the outback, everything is really expensive.
Is that right? Yeah, I guess so. That makes sense. It's all going to get shipped in, right?
Yeah, so it's got to get shipped in, and then it's got to be stuck on the back of a lorry for however long it takes to get across. And so everything is really expensive when you're in in the proper outback, like in the Nullarbor and stuff. It's crazy money. So it's expensive to stay, it's expensive to eat, it's expensive to drink. So you're leverage, and then Australian dollar against the pound the pound's very weak against the dollar, so you don't actually get a lot of your money. Right. And like the places we're staying in, like you'd be going across the Nullarbor, and it's how we planned it. I did it with my mate Francis again. I say we planned it. I planned it because he was just like, I don't want to plan it. I was like, okay, I'll plan it then. Standard. But to be honest, there's not much you can do with the planning riding across Australia. It's basically there's a trucker stop, what would roughly be the length of a fuel tank, give or take. And so that's when your next stop is.
Okay.
Is the next trucker stop. And that's just how it was. It was like, and you would maybe have a trucker stop somewhere in the middle of the day so you could get some more water and stuff. But quite often that wasn't there. There was no middle day trucker stop. So it's quite often get on the bike at 7 o'clock in the morning, ride until 7 o'clock at night, and just carry everything that you had. Like I had to carry extra water, extra food, everything like that. I would have like a little drawstring bag with extra bottles of water in it, and was using those Volet straps, so like really stretchy, like rubbery straps, and then wrapping them around like my saddlebag and pushing like additional water bottles underneath it, because the hot days were 30 plus degrees, and you just needed to have that extra bit of I guess supplies if you knew there was not going to be a stop. But it was pretty cool.
And did you just camp at those at the truck stops as well? Like when you pulled into a truck stop at night, did you just set tents up and stay there, or?
No, so we debated it, but the reason why we didn't was, first of all, Francis is scared of snakes and spiders.
Yeah, so am I. That's okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of big snakes and spiders in Australia. They're also very dangerous. And the second reason was that most of them, in a lot of those kind of regions of Australia, running along the trucker stops, you could get arrested for it.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, they're pretty hot on it as well. But on the flip side, most of these trucker stops have like a B&B kind of place attached to it.
Well, that's okay. Yeah.
So we just stayed in those kind of places, and they weren't cheap, and they were nothing special. But it was a bed. You can have a shower, right, and charge up bike computers, whatever you need to charge up for the next day, effectively, which is good. I'd like to go back and ride more of that, though. Definitely, I'd love to go and explore more of Australia, and especially at that time of year. Like we went September, October, I think it was, and it was like perfect weather. Like it was warm, but not crazy hot.
Yeah, I was down there a couple of ago for TDF or Tour Down Under, and because we have We have a subsidiary company there, so it was great. They have a big expo, and we were down there and I ended up taking a few days and just kind of hanging out on the beach at the end of it. And of course, that was February. So in Canada in February, being in Australia for most of that month is a welcome distraction.
Yeah, I mean, and that'd be in Adelaide, wouldn't it? February in Adelaide.
Yeah,
lovely as well. Such a nice city.
It's a beautiful city. We were in Adelaide for a couple of weeks, and then sort of banged around and ended up finishing up in Sydney. So I just took a hotel on the beach in Sydney for the last few days and did nothing. I didn't ride my bike. I just got up, walked to the beach, lay on the beach till noon, went and got some lunch, glass of wine, went back to the beach, went back, got changed, dinner, a couple glasses of wine, home for bed. It's a really good way to get it down.
It's ironic, isn't it, that I've got quite a few friends in Australia, and they're all obviously like cycling around at the moment, but it seems to be raining loads out there right now.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a lot of rain, Sydney way especially, a lot of rain at the moment. And I'm like, I said to one of them, like, I don't know why you're complaining, because it's still warm rain.
They took a beating this year, though. When you think about the fires and the pandemic, it's not been easy.
Yeah, they've had it tough, definitely. And then, so much of Australia was in a very, very strict lockdown as well.
Yeah.
Melbourne was completely locked down, and, police readily patrolling the streets, finding people, which is, I mean, in the current global situation, is the right thing to do, but it's hard mentally to deal with that. But
so you guys are in lockdown, full lockdown as well now. And so I know that there's a limitation to the distance you can stray from your door, but are you actually allowed to wander down there and get some groceries and whatnot, or do you have to have permission, or is there a window, or how are they managing that?
So what the government have said, it came into law on Wednesday. We are Thursday, aren't we? Yeah, it came into law on Wednesday.
Yeah.
And what they've argued, so in London, we've technically been in a lockdown kind of since the start of December, really. So the system in the UK is a tiered lockdown system. Tier 1, it is, to be honest, it's a bit of a joke on how it's organised, because it keeps changing. But Tier 1 is like no lockdown, and we're now got Tier 5, which is a full lockdown. So London was in Tier 4 from kind of the start of December anyway, which was pretty much a strict lockdown. The whole of the UK went into Tier 5 lockdown as of Wednesday. And basically what the government have said is you're allowed out once a day if you need to go out to get groceries, etc. Well, to get groceries, that's pretty much the only reason you're allowed out.
Right.
And you're allowed out to exercise, but they've stressed that you have to be exercising in close proximity to where you live. Which I agree with, I have to be honest. I don't, if you're going out cycling and you're riding for like 4 hours and cutting into another county or whatever, it kind of seems to defeat the purpose a little bit. Understand that people need to go out and get fit and everything. But I mean, my personal stance on it is like, I'm basically riding indoors or going to the parks near me. And that's kind of as much as I'm comfortable with. But some people will go out and ride long rides, and their argument will be that they're, minimal impact on their own riding. So I can see it
by
from
themselves. Yeah,
I can see it from both sides. You're allowed to exercise with one other person outside of your household or your support bubble. So what they class as your support bubble is people you're effectively, I guess, gone into lockdown with. So for example, myself and my partner, we both have our own homes. But we basically live between each other's houses. So that's our support bubble, is the two of us. And you're allowed to have a support bubble if you live alone, effectively.
But she lives outside of London, doesn't she?
She lives south-east London. I live north-east London.
Right. So in theory, you could get out of town a little bit more quickly if you were staying with her, couldn't you?
Yeah, it's easiest to get out of town from where she is and where I am. So if I was to go out for a ride, I could go out into like Kent a lot easier.
Okay.
I don't particularly feel that comfortable with it though. But it's not an issue because like she's still in London. She's still in the, we both live in the greater borough of London effectively. So London as a county almost is its own entity and treated in its own way. But yeah, we're being advised to, you know, only go out if you essentially need to. There's not really like, there's definitely like a greater police presence, but it's no less than it has been during the pandemic anyway, to be honest with you. It's felt like there's been a greater police presence throughout this pandemic across the city. But the good thing about this lockdown is they are trying to encourage people to exercise and stay healthy, which they did with the previous lockdown, which is great for cycling because we see with the first major, we've had 3 lockdowns in London now, but the first one, you saw this massive spike in new cyclists. Mm-hmm. And there was, you know, provisions were made for closing certain parts of the city for cycling, right. Introducing more cycle lanes in the city, making it much more cycling friendly because London is not cycling friendly at all, but they're trying to encourage that much more. And that's why, like in the UK, bike sales have just been really, really high this year. You know, there's no stock of anything. You can't get bikes. I know. I think it was like in the summer, you'd struggle to get hold of a Cervélo, for example, until March.
Yeah.
That's just because the demand.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a beautiful, for lack of a better term, positive externality of COVID is the proliferation of new cyclists, or back to the sport, or taking the opportunity. You know, now they've got a block of time in their hands, or time with their family, or whatever it is. And obviously Cervélo was not a player in those early days when it was the sort of $1,800 USD bike and below that just cleared out, like they were just gone.
Yeah.
But Cervélo weathers the storm, in a way that a lot of brands like Porsche would, for lack of a better comparison, because we tend to be a second purchase for people that we're often not an entry level bike. For a first purchase road bike. And also, our price points are a little bit higher. And so you have, what we benefited from was those families who couldn't go to Whistler for the winter, or take the family to Chamonix, or whatever it is that they do on March break. Then they had this chunk of cash and they were going to do some renovations on their house. And where I live, there's a huge population of second homes on the lakes that a lot of people Toronto or Ottawa or big cities have a second home, and on the weekends they drive up to these places. So usually May 24th is the weekend that a lot of people would open their cottage. We call them cottages, and that's when the ice has gone out. The lakes aren't frozen anymore. It's warm enough that you can get in. Open the cottage for the first time since maybe October. Tidy it up, fill the fridge, turn the power back on, all those kind of things. This year they did it in March. Wow. As soon as COVID, a lot of people who were in a position where their kids were no longer in school, it was all online, and they weren't in a situation where they were going to lose their job because they weren't in the office. They just picked up and left the city. They just ran from Toronto and moved into their cottage, which is like a dream come true for everyone who has a cottage anyway.
Yeah.
Means you're waking up every day on the lake, and and your boat's bobbing in the water, and whatever. So it's really changed the landscape. But the other thing is, the village that I live in is kind of the gateway to a lot of the lakes, and there's a bike path that comes up from the closest city, which is 8 or 9 kilometers long, and then you can add another kind of 8 kilometer block onto it. It spits you out basically right across from the window that I can see out. And I, from April onwards, family after family after family riding up for ice cream, with their kids, bikes and hybrids, and so I saw that firsthand. I was reading it on one screen, and it was being validated at my window. Like, it was a beautiful thing to watch. And then as the summer progressed, I started to see that transition, or the addition to that was the road cyclists, was because there's this pool table flat, road that comes up the river right to my house, and it, leaves town, and it's whatever it is. I think it's 30 kilometers round trip from the city of Peterborough to my door and back, on this pool table flat winding road that just stays right beside the river. And so if you just bought a road bike, man, that's where you're going.
Yeah.
So all day it was just like, oh, there's another one. Oh, there's another. Oh, look, there's 5 people. You know, and you can tell brand new kit, a little wobbly, like, but beautiful. Like, just the growth of the sport was evident. You know, here it was really cool.
It's like it does feel like it's because cycling is a sport that is very accessible to anyone and everyone. You know,
it's beautiful that way. You know,
and more and I think it's much more enjoyable than, say, running, for example. I'm not a runner, so I'm obviously a bit biased. But you know, the criteria is that you need to have a bike to go out for a bike ride. And I understand that, you know, but you can buy a bike from anything from, in the UK, you can get a bike for a couple of £100. You could get even cheaper if you were to buy secondhand, 50 quid even. Mm-hmm. Go into a charity shop and you can pick one up for as cheap as anything.
Yeah.
Up to £15,000 probably. I don't even know what the top end of bikes are now, you know, everything in between. So there's obviously a lot of diversity in price points, but you can get something pretty much for whatever your price point is. And as you say, people then kind of will go, I've kind of outgrown that bike, maybe not physically, but maybe as in not in their height, but maybe kind of like in their skill set or their strengths or whatever. And so they want to upgrade to something a bit better, a bit faster, a bit lighter, better componentry. And you do see that there's definitely a process. And as people get more and more interested in the sport, they start then going, I'm going to go to electronic gearing, whatever it is, those kind of little things. Like I wouldn't want to have electronic gearing now.
The reality is that it is a thing that just keeps on giving, right? When you think about the bicycle carrier wave, you know, from day one, you know, all the advantage, the sort of spurs that come off the kind of concept that is the bicycle. There's, you know, the access to work, there's access to school, there's access to health, there's mobility, there's emancipation, there's, like, you know, the history of the bicycle as a carrier wave is profound and on a much perhaps less important level than something like emancipation or access to school, is the idea that, yeah, you know, after the pandemic, after COVID subsides, you know, maybe 80% of people will keep their bike and continue on the path that they've fallen in love with, and 20% will put it in the garage behind the golf clubs and go back to their normal lives. That's that 80% of people will also, you know, even if it's 60% of people, it'll spawn, you know, another group of people coming in, because now your buddy's doing it. You maybe didn't, you know, at the time for whatever reason, but now you got a buddy who's doing it, and he's like, hey, you should come and, like, come on, man. I'm like, here, I'm going to get a new bike. Why don't you ride this one? Because I'm stoked now and I'm going to get DI2 or whatever it is. Now I've got this bike, or use my buddy's bike who's not riding anymore, you know, like, and so, there's another, so it constantly kind of has these, you know, tendrils that reach out and pull other people in. I mean, we've seen it a number of times over the length of the time that I've been in the industry, where, you know, one thing leads to another thing, leads to another thing, leads to another thing. I mean, the one that I remember vividly was the rise of 105, you know, Shimano 105, which was understood to be the aftermath of mountain bike. You know, it was like mountain bike happened, it resurrected cycling because you weren't fixing flat tires all the time and you could ride anywhere and they're durable and, you know, so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. But then, you know, someone had a buddy who was a road guy who said, try my bike. And they realized that, you know, they'd spent 5 years learning how to become a mountain bike rider for all the right reasons. And then they went fast. So then they bought a second bike, and that was 105, you know, and that was sort of understood at Shimano as being the kind of the reemergence of road was coming off the opportunity that mountain bike provided to bring people into the sport, you know, which wasn't about getting dropped, and it wasn't about having to fix a flat tire on a 21 millimeter wire on tubular or a clincher on the side of the road, like all the negative crap that was tied to road cycling in the 80s, you know, was suddenly like no longer there, you know, and then that led into Lance and so on and so forth. So I think, you know, I'm positive that I'm confident that after this whole thing, yeah, we'll see a dip, but then it'll also provide these opportunities to drag more and more people into the sport. I think gravel right now is a really interesting space. The convergence of people coming from road and people coming from mountain, and also people coming into the sport new, again, high durability, you know, low gears, steady state, You know, it can be a solo activity. It doesn't, you know, you're not in that situation where you're riding with people who are out to drop you all the time.
Yeah.
You know, there's these kind of really much more egalitarian spaces now in cycling that weren't there when it was just road. So,
yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because like another point in the UK that was very clear where that happened was the London Olympics was a very noticeable increase in road cycling in the UK. Mm-hmm. You know, 2012, the year when Bradley Wiggins won the Tour de France, Bradley Wiggins then goes and gets a gold medal in the time trial, and we know we'd smash it on the track as well. And then you start seeing that was a massive, like, the whole thing was about inspiring a nation, and it definitely did increase the interest in cycling, athletics, whatever it was. There was a definitely noticeable increase in it. And same now with gravel, how gravel has sort of become much more accessible. Like I used to, when I was younger, I used to race cyclocross races over road or anything like that. And it was because I found them fun. And I thought it was, you know, the community was really fun and really relaxed. I always used to find going to like a crit or whatever, everyone was just a bit stuck up and they're like fucking shoulders all hunched up and didn't really want to chat. But you go to a cross race, everyone's drinking beers and having a laugh, and it's fun. You get covered in shit, go home covered in shit, try and wash everything that you can wherever you are. Basically, it was normally, where's the nearest petrol station that has a jet wash? I'm going there and gonna clean everything. But you know, unfortunately, we've had very little cyclocross racing in the UK now because of the pandemic. But you know, the gravel side of it as well. A lot of people that are doing cross are looking at gravel and just going, "No, this bike works for it. I'll just use this for now." And then you then see that people going, "Actually, maybe I want a specific gravel bike because of the geometry of it or the gear ratios, whatever it is more suited to it." But I did have one question to bring up on what you previously said, and I'm going to ask you it because I feel like I could forget it. Shimano 105, I honestly think that's one of the best group sets that Shimano's ever made. I used to race on 105. I was just like, it is so easy to replace if something went wrong. It was cheap. It worked. It functioned perfectly. Why was it called 105 though?
I have no idea. Because the funny thing about a lot of the Shimano naming protocols is that there's multiple names for it. And, you know, 105 is also 5,500 or 5,600 or whatever it is, you know. And so, you know, I have no idea why it was called 105.
It's such a weird thing, isn't it? Because it's like the only one that has like everything else has a, you know, 9100 is Dura-Ace, yeah?
Yeah.
And 105 is just 105.
It's 105, yeah.
It's not a name, it's just a number. And everything else, you've got Dura-Ace, Ultegra, Sora, Tiagra, whatever it is, but then you have 105. And I remember thinking, why? Why is it 105? And it's something I really don't know the answer to, and no one seems to be able to answer it.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. I'm going to ask. I'm going to find out. I still have some friends at Shimano. I'll see if we can sort it out. But I do know that the stories I remember was that a lot of the names they just brainstormed names. There was no systematic approach to naming protocols. Yeah. Tied to, you know, okay, we're going to look at the epics and we're going to name things off it was none of that. It's like, this sounds like a great idea, you know? So they do it. It was almost like everything was in a silo and they would just name it based on the whim of you know, and I remember those discussions specifically around Diori and Ultegra were just sort of like made up sort of names that they thought were
good words.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Like we've spoken long about like the naming process of some of Cervélo's bikes as well, and the Caledonia is one that I really like. I like the story behind it, and what I also quite liked about it unintentionally is that the video that was released with the launch of the bike was with loads of Scottish people, and it just tied in quite nicely. Caledonia, Scotland. It just, for me, I was just like, yeah, it's quite funny. Like, slight inside joke. But what people might not realize is the name actually comes from the road by the office, doesn't it?
Yeah, it was our sort of kiss goodbye to Toronto, really. I mean, there's lots of reasons that we wanted to have a name that, as opposed to an alphanumeric code, the way we use with R5 or S5 or whatever. And it signaled a couple of different things. A transition away from being what we would consider a straight race bike. It was more about experience and more about the enjoyment of the sport and the experience of the sport. And, and make no mistake, like, we don't decouple high performance from experience. And that's always one of the challenges, is choosing the language around something like that, where you say, well, it's not a race bike. Well, people then think, okay, it's detuned. Well, it's not. It's just, you're not going to pedal through a corner at 50K an hour on it, So, but we wanted to differentiate those bikes from the kind of raw, like, all the sacrifices made to make it a flat out race bike, which is tied to comfort and stability and all those things that make it move quickly and accelerate quickly, but are maybe at the cost of some other opportunities with, like, stability and comfort and so on and so forth. But also, we were based on just off a really crappy, beat up street in the northern end of Toronto. And it got progressively worse as the years went on. And it was sort of one of those main spurs, but it was secondary. So they didn't really pay attention to it in terms of its upkeep. So whereas the other kind of main thoroughfares were, repaved and filled, they just let this road Caledonia just rot, basically. And so this road that we took into our office every day was just beat to hell. So as we kind of thought about how we would say goodbye to Toronto appropriately, it seemed a good option to use the name Caledonia, because it brought us into that kind of realm of being an experience name, like a Sparrow. It referred to the crappy road that was in front of our old office, and it was our kind of departure. What's really interesting in the development of it too is this idea that people started to call it Cowie, which is also kind of a neat opportunity too, because it ports really nicely into that transition off of Caledonia and into California.
Yeah.
So there's lots you can. It's ended up being more appropriate than we even thought when we named it.
That's really, I didn't think of it on that side of it, but
Yeah.
yeah, that's a really nice way of thinking about it as well. And I've still not ridden one. I've still not ridden one yet.
It's a beautiful bike.
Yeah, I've heard.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I will end up riding one this year at some point.
Oh, I hope so.
For something from a chat that I had earlier today, ironically. And it, I mean, I'm just a sucker for the paint jobs of it. They're all beautiful, every single one. They look super smart, and it's a super smart bike.
You know what, I as someone that comes from, I come from a background of riding, traditional race bikes, throughout. It really is interesting and quite surprising and satisfying to ride a bike like a Caledonia now, which, as I say, the goal is to not decouple high performance from the concept of it not being a bike that you would pedal through corners on, because there's this kind of linguistic attachment, high performance is race, but it's not really, it's about how the bike performs, not what you do with it. And you ride a Caledonia, I'm fortunate enough to be, I ride the size bikes that we develop, which are 56s. So I often end up with early samples to test. So usually, like, we released Caledonia this year. I started riding Caledonia October of last year, right? So I had, a few thousand K on it, before the winter hit. And in fact, this time of year last year, I was out on it all the time, Christmas Day, and,
You still got it, that one?
Mm-hmm. I do.
White one with the green fork?
That's the one, yeah.
It's quite cool, like that.
Well, it's fun. We paint those white, they're early layup samples. So we get our first out of tool samples, and then we test them. And with, if they don't break, we figure out how to take material out of them until we do, and then we back up a step, and if they break, then we figure out where they shouldn't, so those are the kind of layup samples. That's the development stuff we do. And then eventually, once we land on the appropriate layup, I mean, this is kind of the way it's done, then we paint them white and put them in action quietly in back roads, like where I live. And they're painted white so you can see the cracks if they do break, right? So, the goal is to go out and actually use them in the real world and find out, you start to understand how they ride, whether it's what you want or don't want. There's still some room to play point, but also if you do develop cracks, you can see them. So if you paint them black, you can't. Right?
Yeah,
so
yeah, of course.
Color is what that is. Yeah, and then where do you get a fork? Well, we broke the one in testing for the that was painted white, so I pulled the the old paint sample fork off another bike. Yeah, it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun to have those.
And you had did you have one of the sample S5s as well?
Yep.
That's cool.
Yeah, those all appear on my Instagram feed, right?
Yeah, exactly. I've seen them. And
yeah,
so that one, same thing, painted white, and it's got the handlebars are.
It's not. It's my paint sample for S5 was all black. The one that's in my, but the bars and stem are white.
That was it.
Yeah, yeah.
I
still have that white bar and stem. I think they're kind of cool.
Yeah, it is quite cool.
Yeah.
Have you still got that original frame, the black one?
I don't. I traded it in for one with stickers on it at some point. And the reason for that was it gets to a point, like my Aspero also is just a black bike. And after we release them, it's kind of nice to have the stickers on them. So I can, if I go and do a ride somewhere, a club ride or something like that, then people aren't asking me what kind of bike it is. I want them to know it's a Cervélo. So eventually, once the opportunity presents itself, I like to swap them out for production.
But keep something like the white handlebars just because it's quite cool.
Yeah, because it's kind of cool.
Yeah, definitely. It's very fascinating. I find it really fascinating, like hearing how bikes are developed, and like I've said quite a bit. You and I have spoken a lot about this over the last several months in a lot of depth. We've talked about literally every bike that Cervélo has made at some point, pretty much. We've talked about all the current ranges and how they've kind of derived from history and what's happened in the past of those ones. And one bike that I always reference to you, and I'm going to bring it up again, is the Soloist. And
right.
I've found a frame for £107.
Oh, is that right? That'd be nice to have.
It needs some restoration, but
right.
That
bike is a really special bike for Cervélo. I think it was the one that, it was voted, whether it's the Soloist or whether it was the S3 or the SLC SL, that carbon Soloist was voted, favorite pro bike so many times in cycling news. I think aesthetically it represented something at a time. I think it was, people started to understand the transition into carbon. It looked a certain way. It was, it didn't look intimidating, certainly not by today's standards, but it was also soft. There were soft curves, not maybe it was like the Disney thing, the eyes are just a little bit too big or something like that. So everyone sort of really was attracted to it, and it would win like year over year over year, the sort of favorite pro bike.
Oh, it's such a cool bike. I always reference it as like I've been hunting for one forever, but I've then always debated what I always think would be quite cool is to build up the old frame with new componentry.
Right.
To just see how it feels. I think it'd be really awesome. Modern. I say modern. It's not a crazy old bike, but it is still. It's still quite an old bike. Like modern group set, modern finishing kit on it. Like just to see what it would be like. Like in theory, it'd be a really good bike. It'd be incredible.
It's interesting you say that it's not that old, but it's not. I mean, I think we've seen a sort of exponential change in technologies in the past. Maybe, I don't know, throw a number out there. Maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's the decade, maybe it's 15 years, but everything was more or less the same until it wasn't, we know so much more. I always go back to saddles as a great, saddles and spacers to me are like, they were the thing that were so important to the industry. Like when I started, you just had, usually an old English guy that said, put your bars down, get used to the seat. We did. And thank God, somewhere around the sort of end of the 90s, early 2000s, people said, no, you can actually ride a seat that's comfortable, and doing some work and figuring out, pressure mapping and building seats for people. And fitting came along, and we started putting bars where they needed to be. And, and I think along with that came a change in the ergonomics of the perches, so that they fit our hands better. Handlebars got better, and funnily enough, in a lot of ways, handlebars have gone back to the way they were. They're a little bit more refined and a little bit more pro. But, we went from like a set of Cinelli 65s or, to these like crazy ergo bends that really didn't make a lot of sense in terms of actually putting the components on them to use, you know, so the hood's in funny places and you couldn't reach the brake lever from the drop and, you know, all these kind of weird things. But then now it's like, you know, it's starting to come back to this kind of concept of being about how the rider interfaces with it as opposed to something else. And I think there has been a massive change in the components and the way they fit us, you know, both in terms of ergonomics, but also in terms of how they fit in our lives.
It's very noticeable, isn't it? When you look at, for example, I mean, the most obvious reference of modernizing components on a road bike is the current generation S5, because it doesn't look like anything else out there. You've got the wide stem, which, as you and I have discussed many times, is part of that comes out of the aerodynamic side of it, but also part of that comes about how easy it is to then get the cabling through for a mechanical group set. And, you know, having the basically all the I can't think of the words now, how the whole front end is engineered just allows it to work very, very cleverly, test fast, work in a practical sense, that it's easy to build up and service a bike. And also ergonomically, the shape of the bars and everything are really, really nice. Like, they're a nice shape to hold and nice. I always like aero bars because I always find them really comfortable to sit on the top.
Yeah, for sure.
Such a personal thing. But and then, you know, you look, as you say, there's weird like ergo ones that were like angled or always just a bit strange and just didn't. I always found that with those kind of shaped bars, I was like, I had a set for a while, but I always felt like I was clipping my wrists on them because the bend in them didn't feel naturally right. But yeah, I mean, there's so much competition out there now, isn't there, for finishing kits and stuff, and also not just from the fact that you've got so many companies doing it. Brands are also now looking to do it themselves with, you know, integrated front ends of the bike to keep it nice and tidy. The competition is crazy high. I know, like, you look at an example, as I say, you've got the Caledonia 5 or the S5 with the new integrated front ends. Equally, you look at a company like Specialized, saddles, handlebars, stems, wheel, everything. And it makes it more interesting because everyone's got to up their game.
There's a bunch of different reasons to do your own stuff, right? You know, and this is another one of those, like, you can do it to manage supply chain. You can do it to do it cheaper, or you can do it to do it better, you know? And, you know, you got to make those decisions along the way as to why you're making those choices. And, you know, certainly if you're on the scale of a brand like Specialized, you have those opportunities across the board. I mean, you can clean up your supply chain. Arguably, you know, they have done so many good things for, you know, for fitting, for saddles, you know, years. I mean, I think that, you know, that once they kind of got involved between Trek and Specialized, they've really revolutionized how we fit people on bikes. You know?
Completely agree.
You know, and understanding the difference between someone who's going to go out and look for an aerodynamic position versus someone who wants to go ride a really long time and is newer to sport. Like, they finally sort of differentiated and said, look, you don't have to be uncomfortable. You don't have to sit like that person, you know. And for all those people who are forcing themselves into that position, you know, because they think that's how they're supposed to sit, they like gave us permission to not sit like that. But, you know, there's also, but, you know, that said, there's a lot of brands who are doing things, and I don't mean just bicycle brands, there's component brands, there's brands in other spheres that are doing things just to have a thing to sell, you know, and, you know, at a time, you know, when we look at the way the market is reacting globally to product purchase, and we see this return to, you know, smaller builders, local industry, away from kind of mass market sort of supply. You know, you really kind of, you understand the value of the choice to do something because it's you know, there's a great marketing trope these days that I really, really like, which is this idea of missionary, not mercenary. You know, if there's got to be a reason you do something, you know, you mentioned the S5 and the handlebar setup, you know, that's very much, there was a reason to do that. It wasn't just because we wanted to do something different. And you know, Cervélo's brand ethos is to do something that matters, not just do something.
Yeah.
And so, getting back to that, the finishing kits that are in the market, you go online and you see all these brands making handlebars you've never heard of. And you kind of go, why? Like, what is it about the other 50 handlebar brands that you thought you could do better?
Yeah.
Right. Or whatever drug, whatever it is. And you got to ask those questions. And at a time when we're, certainly as a brand like Cervélo, we're talking about performance all the time.
Mm-hmm.
As a consumer, as an athlete who's looking at purchasing a bike, you've really got to ask those questions about why people are making the choices they're making. Like, why did they choose this handlebar? Why did they choose this integrated handlebar and stem that I can't adjust? Why did they choose that? And that's going to be a relative answer depending on the price point of the bike, or whatever the design directive is, or whatever. But I think it's legitimate to ask those questions about, and push brands on why they make the decisions they make.
Yeah, definitely. I haven't warned you, and should I have warned you? What I always do at the end of podcasts, we'll start to wrap up now. I'm very conscious that I would like to have my dinner soon.
Yeah, I guess I'm chatting for a while.
And how I normally end podcasts, I got told off because I didn't do this with someone, and so I'm making a point of bringing it back now. Is I ask people for 5 life tips or hacks, and I ask for 5 very strictly because 3 is easy. The 4th one normally involves calling me a twat or something, and then the 5th one is normally brilliant. So that's why I ask for 5. And it doesn't have to be to do with cycling. It can be anything. So past examples, to give you a bit of the scale of them, have been cooking examples. So, for example, putting your spices in your pan for a couple of minutes with a bit of oil to release the smell and the taste from the spices. I do that all the time now I cook. And that came from Dov from Parcours. Thank you, Dov. Another example is... and the guy that's going to kill me for saying this one because he was so uncomfortable telling me that if you're in an emergency situation that you need tire sealant, strawberry flavored lube works.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So are they can you reverse that?
Haven't asked that one. So it could be anything and anything under the sun, but 5 of them.
5 of them, eh? So, what's that? So that's okay. It's kind of fun. I mean, I think about, the way we move through the world all the time. And there's a handful that come to mind pretty quickly. I've always been a fan of, to borrow some lines from Fast Time Ridgemount High. I'm a big fan of wherever you are, it's the place to be. Isn't this great?
Yep.
And that's tied to a little bit of slowness, which is another tip. I think we all put our foot on the gas and we move quickly. And as someone who's just spent the last, 8 or 9 years on airplanes doing really fast turns in and out, a lot of that stuff comes at the expense of our health if we're not careful. And I think that taking the opportunity, to realize, to look around at where you are, figure out what it is that makes it awesome to be right there and not constantly dreaming of being somewhere else. It's not about 10 minutes or a half an hour from then, but maybe right at that time you go, this is a great place to be, man. And it's tied to a bit of slowness. I think you got to allow yourself some slowness. And whether that is, just going for a bike ride and looking around and not training, whether that's allowing yourself to enjoy a glass of wine at night, or, from a family perspective, I think that one of the best things we can do as adults, tip number 3, is actually enjoy the time we have around kids. And a little bit trite, but they have a way of moving through the world that is about being inquisitive and letting them have the opportunity to ask questions to you that make you think, and not dismiss their innocence is a pretty special place to be. When I taught grade 4 for a brief time, that was one of the things that I found so amazing with that age group, age 10, 11, is that they're developing personalities, but they're thinking, and they haven't lost the confidence to ask stuff.
Yeah, nice.
And so number 5 is ask questions. it comes down to one mouth and two ears, right? Listen before you speak, and think about what it is that's going to come out of your mouth. There's a lot of interesting stuff out there. People are interesting. There's a lot to learn, and taking the opportunity to listen to the people around you before you judge them or before you jump in with opinion often gives us, a little bit of time to think through and make some more profound decisions. I think lifelong learning is tied to that. I think we've got to be prepared to always be listening and learning to move forward. If we get stuck in our ways, if we don't take the time to question what it is that we're hearing or we're being told or we're reading, we end up in a situation that our friends to the south are in mass. If you're not questioning the information that's coming in, decisions are made too easily and perhaps not always grounded in reality.
That was a fantastic 360 circle to the start of the episode.
Gotta tie it all back, man. It all comes back together,
A weird and magical world. It's all connected. That's what
it is all connected.
My dad always says to me, my dad's like he's a very shy man. He's incredibly shy, which I find hilarious because I'm very good at making him feel uncomfortable. I'm trying to get him to do a podcast because he has some really fascinating. He used to be a professional motorbike racer, so some of the stories are fascinating.
Yeah.
And he used to be a professional motorbike racer. He was top of his game, one of the best in the world in the 80s. Professional sidecar racer. Put himself. Yeah, he was the passenger.
That's a thing.
Yeah,
he was the passenger.
Yeah, he was world champ at that at one point. So he was legit stupid.
Right.
And he's also on the flip side, put himself in a coma from racing. He was in a very bad crash. So I'm really keen to do a podcast with him because he's got such an interesting way of thinking and way of life. And he's one of these people that's like, everything happens for a reason. Everything's connected. This happened, which meant that this would happen, which meant this would happen. He's like, I was in a coma for, quite a long time. But on the flip side, it meant he ended up reconnecting with his brother when he came round.
Right.
So there's so many things that kind of tie into things. And I will make him come on a podcast sometime.
Yeah.
I just know that he is so uncomfortable with video chats. And he's unbelievably shy. This is why it won't happen, because he's really shy. But the whole fact, as you say, everything's connected. It all ties around. Completely agree with you. And with that, Phil Spearman, I love talking to you, as you already know. It's always a pleasure.
It's been a blast.
And it's always a pleasure.
For me too, Chris. It's kind of funny. I mean, we've started down this path a couple of months ago chatting about bikes, but what people won't see from the edits is our meandering into art and architecture and furniture and the Bauhaus and all the things that kind of, because as you say, it's all tied together. It all comes back. We have there's decisions we make and things we're interested in this world that kind of tie us together through a bunch of different avenues. It's kind of neat to connect.
On that subject of Bauhaus, I've been thinking about buying some nice furniture for my new bike. Yeah, my partner was like, she was showing me photos of this beautiful apartment. There's a property place called The Modern House, which sells really beautiful houses in the UK. And there was this, and I follow it because it's just so aspirational. And there's an apartment that had loads of Bauhaus influenced furniture in it, and Mies van der Rohe furnitures and chairs. And she was like, what do you think of this? I was like, that's a Mies van der Rohe chair. That's stunning. And she was like, do you really like that? Like, I've wanted one of them all my life. Yeah. I can't afford one. And she was like, maybe one day when maybe one day we can work out if there's a way of getting hold of one. And I was like, straight away, I was like, eBay. No, I can't afford that one. But, you and I could talk about that kind of stuff for hours anyway. When I worked in architecture, I used to spec there's a few brands of furniture I always used to spec, or companies I always used to spec. One of them is I always used to spec Tom Dixon stuff.
Oh yeah.
at the time it was very in trend, like Tom Dixon lights and stuff. And it meant in turn, I ended up with an assortment of pieces of Tom Dixon furniture that are way more expensive than I can afford. And one of them that I have, which is to my side, is a cast iron table. It's beautiful. It's like a little coffee table. It's probably about, 30 centimeters square, but it's cast iron, so it weighs a ton.
I was gonna say, you got to move that, eh?
Yeah, it's literally like two hands carrying it up, and it's like dropping it down. And then another thing is I used to spec quite a lot of Philip Stark stuff. He's one of my favorite designers. And I ended up with, I've still got them, 2 of his ghost chairs, which are like clear plastic chairs. Which,
yeah.
But I have 2, there's 2 styles. There's the one which was like a curved back with armrests, which is the one that most people know. And then there's another one, which is a very geometric, straight base, straight back chair, which very few people know about. And I've got a couple of them because they're quite hard to get hold of. And the only reason I got them was because the contractor bought extra ones and were like, "Oh, do you want them?" And I was like, yes, I would like them. Yeah. And then the last example of random things that have turned out through old work is the chair that I'm sitting on, which you can't actually see. But the chair I'm sitting on is from a German company called Brunner. And this chair, this one that I'm actually sitting on, was in one of the new Star Trek films.
Oh, yeah?
Real ones. Yeah, it was blown up. But it wasn't. This one wasn't actually blown up, but it was in the boardroom in one of the newer Star Trek films where, what's his name, Chris Pine is Captain Kirk in it, and they go into the boardroom, and the boardroom gets blown up. I'm on one of those chairs. I've got 2 of them.
Ah, nice.
And I debated selling one of them for a long time. A point when I needed the cash, to be honest, and I never sold it because I was like, people just saying they don't know the value of that kind of thing.
Right, but if you said it was in Star Trek as a prop, you'd sell it so fast to make your head spin.
Yeah. My dad's a Trekkie as well, and I did see if he wanted it, and he was like, "Oh, I don't have any need for it. I never sit at a desk."
Right.
Yeah. Circles again. Somehow got back to my dad.
Exactly.
On that note, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, sir.
I'm recording now, and I'm still going to talk to you afterwards because that's the cookie crumbles. Thank you.